All right, he says we're going live. So. All right, hello everybody. Thank you for joining our AAC in the Cloud 2023 session. We are happy to have Irene Hughes presenting to us today about how the Jaggedness principle improves AAC services. I'm pretty excited to hear about this. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Irene.
Thank you, Brian. Scott, sorry. Hi, everybody. I have no idea who everybody is. I am Irene Hughes. I'm out in Vancouver, Washington, and it has been just amazing. I just got done listening to a great session with a couple of speakers. It was just amazing. Learned a lot about screen recording. Can't wait to go back and re-listen to the recording and realize that there's been lots and lots of sessions that are very hands-on and really drilling down on practice and what we do when we're working with students. And this session will be a little bit different from that because I'm going to look at something called the Jaggedness principle, which was part of what I was looking at when I was designing the department and putting together services, a service department for assistive technology and augmentative communication. And I had to look at the whole big picture and then bring that down to the small services. So it was how that particular philosophy ran through everything that happened. So I've been working in special education and with technology. It seems like forever. I started in 1979. I've been a special ed teacher and an occupational therapist and have worked in technology since the early 90s, late 80s. So just been around a long time. I always like to have this disclaimer because I have a lot of friends who are much more talented than I am and have often talked about people who co-opt their work. And I want to make sure that that never happens. And I am always on the web looking at people's things and getting things. And I want to make sure that I tell people that I don't have an original thought in my head. I try to document everything I get, but if I've missed something, I'm very, very sorry. But everything you see is a representative of someone else's brilliance. Okay, so I want to know how many of you can define average. So I put together a little poll and it's just quick. Let's see if you know what average is. So if you just click on the QR code or type in this link, you will get to this poll. And it will, you just answer the questions. And we should be able to see the answers. Are people able to get to the poll? So 2 people in. I'm not sure how many people are here. I can't see. I can reset results. Cancel. Ah, yay. Okay, so we have our results. So I'm gonna go back to here. And so the first answer was the meet was actually what is a median, which is the middle of the list. And that's, we even talk about the median in the road. So it's just whatever is the middle number when you put all the numbers in order. The second was the most common frequently seen number, and that's what a mode is. The third was the mean. It's what most people think of when they think of the average. It's when you take all the numbers and you add them up, and then you divide them by that number, and it gives you a number. Usually that's what you think of as an average, but in reality, all three of those are types of averages, which is one of the problems that we have when we try to work towards the average, is that when we start, we're already starting with three different possible understanding of what an average is. In 1995, a couple of different gentlemen put together the average, two artists, and put together what the average female and the average male would look like. They took 1,500 men and women, the ages between 21 and 25, and made statues of them. Then they held a contest to see who looked most like these, to find one person who met that average. They got 3,866 entries, and they finally found one woman who could meet their specifications for an average woman. Even though you would think that if it was the average woman, there would have been a lot of winners, there were not, because average has too many variables. In education, we're always looking at the bell curve, and we are always thinking about our average student being those students who are in the middle of the bell curve. Or we're talking about our students who are below the average, or they might be above the average. And we're designing curriculum, and we're designing programs for our students who are below average, above average, or average. And there are some inherent problems with this. Say we are trying to design for above average. You can take a look at Isaiah Thomas. Should note, he wasn't a very good person in general. He was a great basketball player, but he had a lot of issues. But he was hired by the Knicks in 2006 because they wanted the winning team. So his philosophy was, I'm going to make a winning team because I am going to hire the best of players in each area. So if I hire the best, those that are all above average, we will have the best team. Well, that turned out not to be true. They had the worst team in history. They continued to have the worst team until they got him out of there, because he was only looking at one aspect of best, the best shooter, the best defender, whatever it was. He was only looking at that aspect of best. They didn't know how to play as a team. They didn't know how to play any other roles. So what we look at now is we still are looking a lot at what is best and looking at that kind of average, best, etc. And that has brought us a world of specialty stores, special education, feature matching, some of which is fabulous. I don't want to think that it isn't fabulous. When I was very young, growing up in the 60s and 70s, I happened to have a really big foot. I had size 10 feet. And in the 60s and 70s, little 10-year-old girls did not have size 10 feet. And I had to go to a specialty store because my feet were not average. And I was really glad they existed. In special ed, that's why we have specially designed instruction. And I'm really glad it exists. And for assistive technology and augmentative communication, we look at designing our work and what we're doing for kids and for individuals. We use feature matching so we can get the just right design for our students. And that's a lot because we don't want to just look at average. So this idea of looking at the end of average comes from a man named Ted Rose. And this is where we get into the concept of jaggedness. I'm going to show this short video. I'm going to hope it works. Sorry.
Are you sharing your screen?
It should be. Just a second.
Okay.
Is it?
Well, now you shared it, but without the sound. If you go back in and share one more time, there's a little place where you click share sound as well.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries.
You share.
You may need to unshare your screen and share it again.
Share sound.
So the issue is, how do you design one cockpit?
Did it work that time?
That can
It
fit
did. If you want to turn it up a little bit.
For a long time, it was assumed that you could do this by designing for the average pilot. That almost seems intuitively right. If you design something that fit for the average size person, wouldn't it fit most people? It seems right, but it's actually wrong. And 60 years ago, an Air Force researcher, Gilbert Daniels, proved to the world just how wrong this really is and what it was costing us. Here's how he did it. He studied over 4,000 pilots, and he measured them on 10 dimensions of size. And he asked a very simple question. How many of these pilots are average on all 10 dimensions? The assumption was that most of them would be. Do you know how many really were? 0. Gilbert Daniels proved there was no such thing as an average pilot. Instead, what he found was that every single pilot had what we call a jagged size profile, right? Means no one's at the same on every dimension. And this makes sense. Just because you're the tallest person doesn't mean you're the heaviest. It doesn't mean you have the broadest shoulders or the longest torso. But this is tricky because if every pilot has a jagged size profile and you design a cockpit on average, you've literally designed it for nobody. So the Air Force realized they had a problem, and their response was bold. They banned the average, meaning that moving forward, they refused to buy fighter jets where the cockpit was designed for an average-sized pilot. And instead, they demanded that the companies who built these planes design them to the edges of dimensions of size, meaning that rather than design for, say, the average height, they wanted a cockpit that could accommodate as close to the shortest pilot and the tallest pilot as the technology would allow.
Can't go? Do this to clear out stuck poop fast.
Okay. So traditionally in AAC services, we have also banned average, and we have used a traditional ATAC assessment where we are looking at each student very individualized. We gather information, we reflect on that information, talk about strengths, concerns, preferences, skills. We do trials, we reflect some more, do more trials, and we do some selection of a final tool, and then we start doing an implementation, which seems like it takes the concept of jaggedness, of looking at all those edges of the individual, and really hones in on that. It really allows us to meet each student's need. But we're also working in a system that has needs. And so the other side results in us taking a really long time in getting students' needs met, because we don't have access to all the things that are on the jagged edge, all the things that the students might need to try. We don't have staff who are aware of all the things that they need to know how to do. Really, not even when I think of the jagged edges, when I'm thinking of accessing switches and putting together mounting systems. We don't have staff necessarily who are comfortable and know how to do those things immediately accessible to us for example, in the school system. So when you're putting together a design for a district, how can you make it so that those needs can be met quickly, so student needs can be met quickly? So how can you look at, okay, what are those kind of more common needs, and what are our jagged edges needs, and how can we get all of that covered in our systems? So what is that, like, how did that all impact education? And what happened is that this concept and Ted Rose really did a lot of impact in the world of education, and came up with what they're calling personalized learning, which doesn't that sound like, individualized instruction? But it said, this learning is not one-dimensional. There's lots of factors that make up our students and how they learn and what they need to learn and how they're going to get to mastery. That not every student is going to learn how to read the exact same way, and that students are not all going to be progressing at the same time, and that we need to look at each student and personalize their learning so that we're meeting everybody's needs. And they've even come up with now things like the Learner's Variability Project, which starts looking at, okay, what are the different factors or variables that we need to start looking at when we're looking at students? And they're taking in considerations just like we do in AAC and AT and have been doing for so many years, like the student's background, adverse experiences, what is their hearing, what's their physical well-being, their sense of belonging, their social awareness, along with things like their attention and their reasoning and processing skills. Like in some ways, it's kind of catching up. This is more information about the vision project. This is just information on that project. I didn't need to go there. So in the end, what came up from that was, when we understand learner variability, we see a design challenge, not a student problem, which to me is pretty powerful. Our issues in assistive technology are not problems with our students. It is problems with design of implementation, design of tools. Designs with flexibility that allow us to reach every student's jagged edge. So what we did was we tried to flip the traditional model, which will look like, some people would say, oh, this looks a lot like a tiered model, because you could kind of think of it as a tiered model. We called it a continuum model, where we set up UDL services that included our list of AT and AAC level tools and services. Then we had district level AAC tools and services. And then we had a consideration point. Were these things working? Or did we need to do more? If at that consideration point they were working, then we went on to, oh, let's go on to implementation plan. Or, oh, they're not working, let's go on to the more traditional assessment model with trials and a set, etc. So when we did this, when we looked at UDLs, we started to do the same thing. What did the district need, and what did students need, and what were their jagged edges? What would you include if you were thinking about UDLs for a district? What would be the types of things that you'd want to consider for students? Let's see if this gets to the right place. Yeah. So if you were looking at AAC tools that were UDLs, that might be for a school district, what kinds of things might you want to have? For example, you might want to always make sure you have, oh, please don't do this to me. This is supposed to share. This didn't do it right either. So things we had selected for UDLs for districts where we wanted to make sure every student had access to voice to text and text to voice. We wanted to make sure every student had some word prediction. We tried to think of what were some of the other things that were important that would be jagged edges. We thought about things like being able to reduce the vocabulary without reducing the level of content. So we did an activity that I had wanted to do, in which we were able to take each area of content and look at what the jagged edges of technology were in those areas. So we were able to say, if we wanted every student to be able to have voice to text and text to voice, what did we have to have available for every student? And what was reasonable? Because we knew we couldn't have available necessarily co-writer, because as a district it wouldn't be affordable. But there might be another product we could have. And so what would that product be? And we started drilling down product by product by product and setting up a system. We also started to look at what did our referrals look like? Did we want to have a simple referral that was very easy, anyone could fill out? Or did we want to have a very long and lengthy referral? And we started talking about who needed to fill those referrals out. Could parents fill them out? Or did they have to come from a team? So we went through every step of our system looking at what would make it so any person could access our system. And that's how we chose to apply those edges. Then we started to look at the jagged edges in teams. When we started working at teams, how could we apply this theory to our teams? So we started to realize that as we worked with teams, we had different levels of awareness, of knowledge, of commitment, of attitude, and of stress levels. And so the first thing we needed to know was that everybody who came through the door was able to kind of leave their ego outside the door. That they could walk in and say, I'm going to be as new at this as you are. And feel okay about that. So we started all of our teams with a basic intro that talked about kind of what we're doing, why we're doing it, why they're there. Why do you want to be here? Why is this important to you? Are you here because somebody told you you had to be here? You know, what are you trying to get out of being at this meeting? And looking at what do you know about doing this? How much time are you able to put into what we're doing? And that, you know, not even really getting into what your commitment, what you're going to have to do for this, more how is this feeling that we're going to add this to your plate? We went over a lot of what are the myths so that we could talk to them, so we'd know ahead of time. So it's interesting because you can look up myths for assistive technology, you can look up myths for areas of assistive technology, and you can look up myths for AAC. And some of them are very different, and some of them are all the same thing. In every area, they think there's a lot of people who will think it gives the student an unfair advantage. And I don't know what story or what technique people use, but those of us who are of an older generation can always use the example of the calculator, which when the calculator came out was what everybody heard. It will give people an unfair advantage. But having a learning disability myself, it gives me an unfair disadvantage. So I don't think using tools that level the playing field is giving me an unfair advantage. I know that digital natives can teach themselves the best way to use assistive technology at school. Used to be what people thought, but I've been watching technology now for a few decades, and there are some people who can just look at it and know it, and there are some people who really need to read the directions. It's just like anything else. It needs practice, it needs directions, it needs modeling, all of those pieces. And it cannot replace teaching. Modeling is teaching, and sometimes that's the message we need to give. And the idea that reaching our potential, we should be able to do that without our technology, doesn't make sense either. So we go through what are the myths, but we try to do it by asking the teams what they're thinking the myths are, letting them talk about what their barriers are. And often they'll come up with this. We hear that as an adult, they feel too old to start with technology. I'm just afraid of the tech. I hear that a lot. And we do a lot of talking about, we're only asking you to look at one tool at a time or one step at a time. I'm only asking you to be one step ahead of the student. And in fact, if you're at the same step as the student, that's fine too, because then the student can see that it's hard for them and it's hard for you. It's a perfect match. The AAC list, I think we've all heard all of these before. It doesn't hinder speech. I'm surprised the list I found here doesn't have that there is no prerequisites, which I strongly agree with. The only prerequisite I've ever found is that the team has to be willing. And that's part of why we do this piece, this is the part where we're getting that team on board, getting the attitude where it needs to be, because that's the jagged edge that all needs to be the same. There's this great website at the University of South Florida that talks about myths and truths. And each one of these, when you hit on it, if you're on the website, it will give you a brief synopsis of what the myth is and then what the truth is. So when you have the slide deck, it's really fun, and it's a great site to give to your teams because they can kind of enjoy it and look on their own. Commitment in this form is referring to the level of commitment that each team member is going to contribute to the success of the project. And it makes a difference. If you have one team member who's not committed, it's that one bad apple, and it can really harm the team. So you need to figure out, what are you going to do if you're working with a team that it is not fully committed or has one team member who's not on board? And what are your strategies for the team? Are they committed? Do they have an emotional connection with the student, with the family, with the colleagues, and with the district? So some of the things is just to work on the idea that the jobs and the responsibilities are volunteer as much as possible. Because then the person who's not as fully committed will not volunteer to do as much, and their lack of commitment will have less of an impact. But if you're also valuing the people who are there and are doing things and they volunteered, they're going to feel more valued, which will hopefully make that person who's volunteering less want to volunteer more, hopefully. Let people feel like it's okay to fail, make mistakes, really listen to other people's ideas and encourage them, even if you're thinking, I know that's not going to work. Let them try. I mean, unless it's going to, sabotage you or hurt something. Fostering that trust will buy commitment, will buy trust, which are all ways of getting your team to work together and work with your student to get better implementation. Attitude. You have to think, who's on my team? And you have certain team players, typically. You have that person who's kind of behind that brick wall, who's like, been there, done that. Don't ask me to do any more work. Why am I here? I don't want to be here. You have the really organized, tell me and I will write it all down. I'm anxious to be here. I'm glad I'm here. I am a worker bee. I am so tired. I have so much work. Why are you adding something to my plate? And yeah, let's go. Let's do this. And I'm sure there are some other folks who are on your team. Some of these folks, they only see the problems. This brick wall is going to tell you why it's not going to work each and every time. Why they can't, there isn't enough time. So how are those questions going to be answered? Have some pre-answer those, or better yet, have probing questions that will allow the team to come up with some answers. So when you hear, well, we don't have time to ask everyone or to ask open-ended questions, what can you say to that team member? Like, what is it that you could take away from your plate to allow that time? What are you doing that you don't have to be doing that you can allow a longer pause? Some of your folks will be seeing this as just different pathways. Well, if we use open-ended questions, maybe we don't have to say yes or no so much. Maybe we don't have to be so directive. Maybe we can do fewer projects, but work on the process. So looking at getting some divergent thinking. And then stress has been such a big part of our school environment. I started in the school environment in 1979, and it's always been stressful, but nothing like this last 6 years. I found this, at the beginning of the year, we're all flying high. It's great. Mid-year, we're all kind of going, whoa, this is quite a bit. and now it's the end of the year, and boy, am I done. So what can we do for our teams that build in stress breaks that the person who's the brick wall and the person who's the racehorse will appreciate? Because, I think, because sometimes I've been that brick wall. If you come in and say, okay, let's all start with a mindful moment and a deep breath, the brick wall person's going to be like, I don't have time for this. Why are they doing this to me? I should be in my classroom grading papers. So what can you do that will allow you to provide a stress break for that personality and for the personality who's just going to be running in late anyway? So kind of thinking of both ends of that spectrum. So looking at, giving some brain breaks. How do you slow down, practice spontaneity, doing some interesting things? What are some interesting ways you can help the team learn about devices, etc.? Disconnect, and just really look at the team's mental health, because we're all suffering now. And for us to give our best for students, we need to give our best to each other. And here are my references for this. I'm really hoping this all made sense. I don't know if anyone has any questions. I think I'm a little early.
Right, let me take a look and see if we've got some comments.
Do we? Really?
Do you have your Slack open, or do you want me to
I
read
do.
them?
I'm sure. I think I have it open. It's track 3.
Mhm.
And many of the tools become commonly used by the general population. Yes, they do. One of the reasons we started setting it up in a system of UDL district approved and then kind of a higher level was that we wanted to become commonly used. So initially the commonly used theoretical one, they were using something that was like, I think, Co-Writer and Snap and Read, which was great because those are amazing products, but they were not being commonly used because they're much more difficult for people to learn how to use, and they're much more expensive. So when we moved into using another product that did some of those same things and could access those skills for free, the pieces we needed for free, more and more people were using them, and we could start having teachers model things like voice to text and text to voice. And we put Co-Writer, et cetera, in our district approved. So if we had students who needed them, they could get them quickly. It didn't delay students receiving it. They are speech to text it's introduced as soon as we introduce any kind of writing. So if we have a student who is not able to, who we introduced, speech to text is it's introduced just like anything else immediately, and text to speech, but it might be introduced simultaneously with still trying to produce letters and language. Does that make sense? creating a district-wide A3 process, currently the new specialist in Vancouver. So Ms. Burke, my slide has my phone number. Why don't you give me a call? And I would be happy to help you with that and show you what we did. It was a process, but basically we selected a very robust and flexible AAC system that you guys may have heard of, Cough Drop, to be our district approved system, and did some extensive training on it, and extensive training on AAC and on implementation, etc., and have made it easily available so that if we had a team that said, I want to try AAC, that would be their first trial spot. And we actually have like a hierarchy of of what to try if that wasn't successful, where we went next. So that kids weren't waiting months and months for what they had to try, etc. So when I started, Evergreen has something like 26,000 students, and there were 40 students using robust systems. When I retired in October, there were something like 150 kids using robust systems. So, I'm a big fan of Cough Drop, but I'm also a big fan of other systems too. What I'm a fan of is that the systems are robust and that they are something that the classroom teachers aren't feeling like they're living in the Tower of Babylon, where they have to learn so many different systems. We moved to a full AAC AT assessment. It varies. Sometimes you walk in and you see somebody and their complex needs tell you that you need to just start with that, but there are some kids that, I don't know, might be a little more like a sneaker wave. Yeah, that's what they're called, sneaker wave. That, we try our first couple tries on our district approved and then move up to it would be the third trial. And what works nice about that is by the third trial, we've already gathered a lot of feature matching information. So by then, we've got enough information that we're selecting by that trial probably a pretty good match. Because by the time we've used Cough Drop with their applications and flexibility, and then when I was there, we used LAMP as our second. We've really kind of hit both ends of the jaggedness theory. The regional non-school based, yes, there are non-school based and regional. Our feeling has always been, you don't change what somebody has. So if somebody walks into our school, unless they're not using it officially, if they have it but they don't use it, that's different. But if they walk into the school and somebody has given them a device and they've been using it, we're not going to change it. It's like if you walk into, I don't see a reason for that. We don't see a reason for that. If you have a Southern accent and you move to the North, I'm not going to make you change to a Northern accent. And then I have to learn it. But if you can be in a place where you're walking around and other people are using what you're using and have your same accent, you're going to learn faster. So one of our hopeful next steps is to get with our community partners and start talking about what can we do to start all moving in the same direction. One of the things that I have sometimes found is that devices are sometimes selected because it's the device that the therapist likes best. And not necessarily that it matches, or that the parent likes best, not necessarily that it matches. Which, you might say that about me. But for us, it was on how flexible it would be for students. We also, the district provided all the devices until students were in like high school to transition. Then we worked wrap around with our outside community members to get funding for the students to have personal devices. Now, if the families wanted to pursue personal devices prior to that, we would help them with it. But otherwise, we had the devices.
I think that looks like the end of the question. That was even though I'm on the parent side, that's still awesome advice, and love what you're doing up there. Big fan. But
Are you okay? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope it came out clear. I always get so nervous.
Well, I appreciate you doing this, and hope you'll do it again